Today, we become legends.
So I'm a little out of the loop on the Smite meta right now as I'm just getting back into the swing of things from my break, but one thing I noticed that became extremely popular while I was gone is the tier 2 Rangdas mask start in solo lane. And maybe elsewhere, though solo is where I see it the most. This was actually something I've looked at before, as the base stats of the item for the cost are super good, especially in a role like solo lane where you're boxing a lot with basic attacks as well as using a lot of basics to assist your wave clear, get totem and scorpion early on before warrior wave clear really comes online. So that 40 power really comes in great use when it's making all your basic attacks do 40 more damage a pop and adding some to your abilities too. With the deletion of boots coming soon in the mid-season patch, these types of tier 2 item rushes will undoubtedly become more popular as people are no longer forced to buy a pair of boots as their first item. Starters will of course still be popular and might be better in most cases than rushing a tier 2, but in this video I wanted to explore some options that are out there in terms of very efficient stats for cost tier 2 items that could work great as a rush, similar to the current Rangdas mask plague we're seeing in solo lane right now. So firstly, Enchanted Spear. This is the tier 2 of the flat pen spear items plus Divine Ruin. At 1400 gold, this item provides 30 magical power and 10 penetration. This one acts quite similarly to Rangdas mask in that it's quite efficient early on for a tier 2 damage item. This, however, trades 40 power for 10 penetration and the ability to actually finish the item. When you do Rangdas mask rush, you never actually finish the item, so it does waste a bit of gold when you sell it later on. 40 power for 10 pen might not seem like a good trade at first, but flat penetration is extremely powerful early on, and 10 pen represents a roughly 6.5% damage increase versus gods compared to having no pen at all. If we take Scylla's 2, which is 85% scaling, 85% of the 40 power we lose is 34 lost damage. The base damage of the ability is 320, so that's around a 10% damage decrease for going this over Rangdas mask, so really we're only losing about 3.5% damage in terms of power scaling. However, penetration also applies to the base damage of all your abilities and is more effective as your build progresses. Factor in the bonus of being able to finish Enchanted Spear into a Desolation or Divine Ruin as needed later in the game, and I think this is a real contender for a tier 2 rush. The physical equivalent of this item, Heavy Mace, costs 1550 gold, making it unbuyable at level 1, and the 150 gold difference is pretty big when it comes to efficiency, so I wouldn't recommend Heavy Mace. Alongside the fact that most junglers are still going to be buying a starter item, I don't think tier 2 rush is going to be popular in jungle just because the starter items are kind of necessary to get sustain from the jungle role. But moving into a more defensive option, Steel Mail is also 1400 gold, which is sort of a sweet spot for this type of item we're looking for since it gets you to buy a couple of potions as well. 200 health and 20 physical protections will go a long way in making you tanky in the early laning phase. Those physical procs not only protect you against your warrior lane opponent in solo, but also against minions, scorpion, towers, and potentially the enemy jungler too if they're a physical, which they usually are, so this defense goes a long way. This might be the most cost-efficient tier 2 physical defense item in the game. Those 20 procs translate to roughly a 9% decrease in damage taken from all physical sources, by the way, and the combination of health and procs on this item is really good for effective health, compared to something like Breastplate at tier 2 that only has procs and no HP. Honestly, one of the biggest reasons this tier 2 could be huge in the no boots meta is because of Mystical Mail. Costing only 950 gold to buy from Steel Mail, Mystical is better the early on you get it, and with the boots no longer a consideration, buying Steel Mail, 2 HP pots and rushing Mystical Mail as soon as you possibly can could be the new warrior meta after mid-season. Farming 950 gold in your first back is a piece of cake as well. It's basically the equivalent of buying tier 2 boots on your first back, which is usually the minimum I will get. If I play well, I can often farm full boots on my first back, which is 1550 or 1600 gold. So backing with 1250 to get Mystical Mail and a health chalice would be feasible in most games, I think, and will give you one of the hardest power spikes imaginable for a solo laner. Sticking with solo since it's my forte, Emerald Talisman is also very efficient for the cost and once again sits in that sweet spot of 1400 gold. This is the tier 2 of Stone of Gaia, a pretty popular item on sub-solo laners, especially ones without sustain like King Arthur. The tier 2 provides 200 health, 15 HP 5 and 10 MP 5 plus 0.2% max health per second in regen, which is roughly going to be around 2 health per second, maybe a little more depending on your level. Add the HP 5 to that and that's 5 health per second in regen. Basically, you have a multi-pot ticking constantly for the entire laning phase, which is super nice, and you can also stack that with potions as well. The upgrade to Stone of Gaia is cheaper than Mystical Mail at only 850 gold, which you would have to make some serious mistakes early on to not have that much for your first recall. 1150 for Gaia plus a Chalice is absolutely reasonable, at which point you would have around 12 health per second in regen, 22 if you count the Chalice. Plus a huge 400 extra HP in your pool that really will help with tankiness. Plus, if you're in a matchup where the passive triggers, this item becomes even better. I think Mystical Mail would outtrade this in your typical Warrior versus Warrior matchup, but I think Warrior versus Guardian or Guardian versus Guardian, this item could be a real meta pickup early on. And finally, Enchanted Ring seems like a no-brainer for magical ADCs as a rush item. 1300 gold allows for 4 potions early on, which is really nice. The stats on the item are 55 magical power and 15% attack speed, which is just really strong. Especially on Freya, I think this has a lot of potential since of course more attack speed means more pulse auto attacks per cast. And 55 power at level 1 is no joke. Olorun also really likes this power since his basic attacks scale with power slightly better than every other mage in the game. The upgrade options for this are basically just Ring of Hecate or maybe Telkine's Ring, but with Hecate at only 1200 gold for your first back, with 4 potions to work with in the laning phase, I think that's doable if you play conservative, and we all know how big the power spike for Ring of Hecate is for those magical ADCs, and it could really set them on a good path to their dominant late game. A couple other tier 2s that I think have some potential but aren't super amazing in my eyes are Charged Bow. At only 1200 gold you can buy 6 pots with this or a Chalice, which is really nice, and OD Bow is surprisingly good for boosting wave clear and poke early on. Restored Artifact isn't amazing in terms of stats for cost, but the upgrade options in Rod of Tahuti and Chronos Pendant are really strong early rushes, so it may be worth getting slightly less power early on for the potential for a big power spike on your first or second back. And finally, a pretty obvious one, but Talon Trinket, the tier 2 of Bancroft's Talon into Bancroft's Rush, will just get better with the boost removal, and the few gods that sometimes use this, like Anubis or Hades, will likely use it even more, and it could become a thing on gods that it didn't really work with before, given Bancroft's insane power spike early on. But that's my thoughts on some Rangdas Mask-esque tier 2 items that could break the meta with the boost removal hitting the game soon. Of course, starters are still great for the cost and offer more build flexibility in general, but tier 2 Rangdas shows that if a tier 2 item has enough stats that are good enough for the cost, people will build it over a starter item. So I think some of these do have potential. Let me know which tier 2 items you think could bust the meta wide open when the new patch drops, and I will catch you guys in another video later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.